Hi, welcome to this virtual forum on racist police terror and how the working class is fighting back. Today, we're going to discuss whether it is possible to abolish the police under the current system, capitalism. We are PLP, the Progressive Labor Party, a communist organization dedicated to the fight to end racism and build egalitarian communist world run by the working class, the 99%. The need for revolutionary change is again being made evident in the current era. In the past few weeks, after the murder of George Floyd, mass people have taken to the streets, numbers unlike we've seen anytime recently. Polls suggest that really as many as 2/3 of workers in America, recognize the racism and have some level of support for the so-called Black Lives Matter movement. And reforms within the activist community for against police terror have really conversations that were just being had by groups are now mainstream. Folks are talking about reimagining police and defunding the police and abolishing the police. Whereas a few years ago, we were just still talking about body cameras and different ways to make minor adjustments to the racist institution of policing. So today's conversation, this is the fourth in a series of programs hosted by PLP to discuss revolutionary communist organizing and analysis. Our next program is going to be about prison abolition, and that will be right here next Sunday, July 5th at 4 p.m. Eastern. Today, there's going to be 4 presenters. We're going to open with a worker going to discuss their experience of losing a family member to police violence and their families fight back against that. The next 2 speakers are going to focus on the history and popular concepts of police abolition and the role of police in our society. And the final speaker is going to discuss the necessity of overthrowing capitalism to end police terror. So a Q&A session is going to follow with your questions and comments. After all the presenters, we're going to try to monitor that discussion in the chat box. However, if you do have a question that you want answered, we ask you to place it in the question box. If you lose video during the event, just try to refresh your page. And if that doesn't work, close your browser and log back in. We are streaming live, but the presentation is going to be available on our YouTube page in the coming days. All of our social media, etc. contact is on this page. So you'll be able to find things and keep in touch. Our first speaker will be Amanda.
My brother Alex Flores was born on April 4th, 1985 in Los Angeles, California. Alex came from a hard-working class family. Our parents migrated to the U.S. in the 1980s to give us a better life and a better future than what they had. He was a loving and caring son, brother, husband, uncle, and friend. He would enjoy spending time and playing with his nieces and nephews. Alex was 1 year younger than me. We grew up together, and I witnessed on how society, the system that we live in today, did not do anything to help him achieve his goals or to even guide my brother back to having a normal life without being discriminated just for having brown skin, color, and living in a poor community. Not saying that he was a bad person, which he was never a bad one. But what I want to say is that there are people in this world that need more help, more attention, because they're going through a tougher time in their life, having to live with racism, discrimination, intimidation, physical and verbal harassment by police. The system knows these things, and the worst part is that they don't do anything about it. Alex graduated elementary and middle school, being brown or Latino and living in a community where police patrols the neighborhood at all times made me think as if we were some type of criminals. Even worse, if you were a male person on the streets. Alex was not able to graduate from high school. Being in a class of 35 plus students was very difficult to be able to interact and focus with teachers. Even worse, when schools are low funded, short in school textbooks and supplies. Alex started working when he was in middle school in a program called LA Conservation Corps clean and green. He worked there till the age of 18. After that, he didn't qualify anymore. Later on, he got married and continued to work here and there, nothing stable. He met friends and would go out with them, partying and starting a living a different life, tattooing his body little by little. Throughout this time of his life, he decided to give it another chance with school. This time it was him and his wife, Gabby. Alex tried so hard to finish dental school, but again was not able to achieve his goal. He needed about 2 more months to be able to graduate, but because of life obstacles or damaged system, underfunded schools, he was not able to finish. At this time, Alex was being targeted by the police. He was in jail for a couple of times for stealing and other misdemeanors and for false accusations. At one point, Alex was severely brutalized by the police officers when he resisted himself to be handcuffed. His wife decided to take pictures of his face and bumps on his head and present them to court. The court decided to drop charges on Alex's case because they knew they had severely hurt and brutalized my brother and have used excessive force. Alex really wanted to live a good, healthy life and be able to form his own family. He tried hard to look for jobs, but they would not give him a chance. Doors would always close on him. I remember that he would tell me that he was timid to talk or speak and did not know how to speak or interact in a conversation or an interview, and that all he knew and have learned was slang language. On the morning of November 2019, Alex was spotted walking a child to school after he noticed him walking alone. That was just who Alex was, always looking out for his loved ones and community. He was killed by LAPD Sergeant Stephen Reese from Newtown Police Station later that morning, a little after 8 a.m. The police claims that my brother targeted the officers with a knife, which that is a completely false statement, and I know this for a fact. The police did not even try to de-escalate the situation. It was a matter of minutes after my brother was shot. The police did not care less to notify the family onto where to find our loved one's body. Alex's death had been a huge loss for our family and community. He was murdered on a Tuesday early morning. An investigator came to my parents' home after 7 p.m. to give the bad news and hand over a business card to call and for more information. Before the arrival of the investigator, my sister Maida had gone to check at the Newtown police station to see if possibly Alex was detained, but the station did not want to give no information. Right after, my dad, not knowing that my sister had gone to check, he went and did the same thing. And the same thing was said to him. Besides that, my dad noticed that the officers who he talked to had an enjoyable expression in their face, as if they were enjoying seeing the family desperately trying to find answers. All day Wednesday and all day Thursday, there was no success and no call back from this person, leaving multiple messages. She never bothered to try to call me back. On this day, Thursday, the Flores family, friends, community, and Progressive Labor Party decided to protest and take the streets towards Newtown Police Station, demanding justice for Alex Flores. When we arrived at the police station, I met this person named Eric Aguiar, a regional program coordinator from the Mayor's Office of Public Safety. When he approached me, one of the questions was to ask me what was the reason for the family to have a rally there and what did I want from them. I responded with so much frustration and anger that this was the third day not knowing where Alex's body was. This guy took out his cell phone and scheduled a meeting for the following day, Friday, with the sergeant and the police liaison to further discuss the situation. On that day, the family was informed where was Alex's body. I demanded for them to pay for the funeral and burial services. Due to the family not having any money, the sergeant's response was to have a fundraiser, like a car wash, to raise the money that we needed. Since Thursday night, for a full month, the Flores family and supporters have been protesting for our loved one's death with the exception of the funeral and burial services. After 1 month, we decided to protest every Friday only. We have been protesting in Kansas for over 7 months. For 7 months, we've been going around the neighborhood. It has been 7 months, and we have still continued to wait for the police and autopsy report. Canvassing around the community, we've encountered that most people have had a bad experience with the police, from being stopped just because of their skin color, to being charged of false accusations, to being brutalized by the police. Since the murder of George Floyd, I joined POP and the tens of thousands in Minneapolis, bringing the story of Alexis to the struggle in Minneapolis and here in LA. We have joined the larger protests as well and have now united with over 5 families who have lost a loved one from police murder. The police has tried to intimidate us by blocking the streets during our protests, to not be able to share our stories and bring awareness to our community. They have also come out in their uniform, all geared up, surrounding us and ready to shoot us with rubber bullets and tear gases, even in the presence of children and the elderly on the scene. More than ever, we have felt the power of the people taking over our streets and have learned to speak up for our loved ones and our future. We have learned that it takes people's unity to empower this damn system. What we have gone through and experienced has made us stronger to continue to fight for justice for our loved ones. The role of the police is not what they have been claiming for years, to serve and protect the people. Their role is to serve and protect themselves by oppressing us, discrimination, intimidation, physical, verbal harassment, brutalization, and murdering our people. They are here to serve and protect capitalism. Carrying a badge, the police think that they have the authority to do and get away with anything without being accountable. The police nor the system will stop us from fighting against this racist system. We will continue to fight for justice for all stolen lives and the future of our people. Now I will introduce our next speaker, Jumi.
Thank you, Amanda, for speaking. Can everyone hear me? Hear me well? Solidarity with Amanda. So today, my name is Jumi, and I am so happy and grateful and proud to be here with my comrades today. First and foremost, I'm a student and always will be, but also a writer and an organizer. And for background, I come into abolition through the vessel of Black radical tradition. So, like, figuring out that, having this understanding and living as a Black person in the United States, that anti-Blackness is the foundation of all of these oppressive systems of society. Of course, the next logical step is for me to see that the worst things that happen in the world under capitalism happens in prisons. So of course, the next step would be to becoming an abolitionist and understanding that abolition cannot happen, or that the goal of abolition is for a transformative world wherein crime and punishment are looked at not as something that is intrinsic to our society, but as something that we can we want to create a world where harm is not perpetuated. And when I see that that is the world that abolitionists want to see, that next logical step after abolition was to become a communist. So now, as a student of abolition and a communist, today I will be talking about the history and the evolution of prisons and police as we know them today, and the prison industrial complex, which abolitionists aim to eliminate, and why capitalism requires prisons and police to exist. So the term abolitionist is very purposeful. It comes from the legacy of slave abolitionists Abolitionists recognize that police are direct descendants of Southern slave patrols and that prisons continue the legacy of enslavement. After the 13th Amendment, we saw granted emancipation except as punishment for a crime. We see the state, as this occurs, we see the state actively criminalizing, at first, poor workers, but then when Black people are no longer enslaved, Black workers, and the police, who are enforcers of the state, maintain the state's social order and gather all of these poor people of color in general, non-white persons, into these state apparatuses wherein they are contained. And so we live in this society, this prison industrial complex that makes us believe that prisons and police are ubiquitous with civilization. But in fact, they're only 200 years old. Dr. Angela Davis, in her foundational text, Are Prisons Obsolete?, directly ties the rise of capitalism to the creation of prisons as the main form of punishment in the early 19th century. And in the same time period, the first police force also come about, terrorizing working class people. The first police force are the first people that go into these labor unions and bust them, criminalizing working class leisure activities and basically reflecting the need of the growing bourgeois class to keep their workers in check. And so we see prisons go overseas with English colonialism. We see all of these modes of exploitation, slavery, colonialism, the rise of the industrialization. We see all of this, all of these forms of exploitation rise alongside the police who are keeping the workers in check. In the US, while slave patrols transform, while Southern slave patrols transform into the Southern urban police, the police force in the North their focus is on protecting property and industry and criminalizing the growing workers' movements. As these strikes build into the 20th century, that is how we see the police get further militarized because they need to suppress the workers for wanting their rights. So with all of this understanding, abolitionists understand that we are oppressed as an entire working class with anti-Black racism, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore describes that capitalism requires inequality and racism enshrines it. And as abolitionists, we understand that also goes for patriarchy, for ableism, for all of these axes of oppression in capitalist society. Capitalism needs oppression to occur. And that Ruth Wilson Gilmore also says that capitalism, criminalization, and mass incarceration then are a class war. And it's this understanding that capitalism makes up this system, that we are all unified under this working class, that the ruling class wishes to dominate and oppress, which follows the Marxist-Leninist tradition of understanding the state, which I will explain now. And so Marxist-Leninist understanding of the state is that it is a body that is formed out of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. That is, the ruling class needs to oppress the working class. And so the state arises in order to surveil, to monitor, to control, to enforce these rules of domination of the economic class, the bourgeois, over the working class, and to maintain the continued exploitation of our class whenever this system is at risk. They bring the police and they bring these prisons to stop it, whether that be slave revolts, whether that be general strikes, whether that be social movements. So we see mass incarceration rise as labor movements rise, as social movements rise, even though crime, as they define it, isn't necessarily rising. Which brings us back to the prison industrial complex, which abolitionist organizations like Critical Resistance define as the surveillance, imprisonment, and policing, like all of those things, all the laws, all of the courts, all of those things that do the work of continuing our suppression and oppression as workers, and which just reflect the nature of the capitalist state and becomes ever present in every aspect of our society. That's how we get prisons and police moving into our schools, our hospitals, and all of these other social institutions. And we see these tools on the streets, these police are not only using these tools to suppress the working class. Here, we also see that they work in symbiosis with the military industrial complex and use the same tools that they use overseas to attack and oppress people overseas here in the streets of Palestine. Like in Ferguson, people in Palestine were giving advice to protesters in Ferguson about what to do in tear gas, what to do with all of these military constructs that were on the streets, because they were also happening in Palestine. So the problem I see with limiting ourselves just to abolition, or even though abolitionists recognize that all of these things occur because of capitalism, what you call it? Even though these things all occur under capitalism, like, and abolitionists like center that in their work, what is the next logical step after that? They don't take anti-capitalism to the next logical step, which is communism, or put that at the forefront of the conversation. History teaches us that because the state requires these things, because the state requires an apparatus, a gaggle of armed bodies to protect state interests, why would they give that up? They won't, they can't. We cannot get rid of the state, of the way that the state keeps its power without destroying the state. Because that is how the state works. So I understand, or we should all understand, that this is a class war with anti-Blackness, racism as its foundation, and I will now be passing the mic to Felipe, who will be talking about the current moment and reform efforts that are happening right now.
What's up, y'all? My name is Felipe, and I'm a member of Progressive Labor Party. I'm a healthcare worker, and for the last few years have been a part of a health-focused abolitionist group in LA, doing work around defunding the police. So today I'll be discussing current campaigns around police reforms, defunding and abolishing the police that have gained some traction, especially since the murder of George Floyd and so many others. As y'all just heard, Jumi laid out the history of policing, from slave patrols to strike breakers to the KKK to the Fraternal Order of Police. From 1704 to the present, we have 316 years of policing and their role in serving the capitalist class through brutality and terror in order to control the labor force. There's also been a long history of resistance, from slave rebellions to the abolitionist movement to the Civil War, to the civil rights and Black Power movements, to the communist movement. The history of resistance has led to numerous reforms, like was mentioned the 13th Amendment, while ending chattel slavery had within it the legal framework for re-enslavement under a different name, incarceration. In 65, the same year the Voting Rights Act was passed, so was the Crime Bill, which also laid the groundwork for racist mass incarceration. Throughout this entire time of resistance, we have seen another key function, more obvious in this moment, is the role of police in stifling rebellion and revolution. So as we think about the defund and abolitionist reform movement in the context of this history, we should be asking ourselves, like has been mentioned, how do these struggles challenge the ruling class and their state? So to clarify, there are two main trends that are happening all around the country as it relates to police reform. The defund the police movement is a phrase that has different meanings depending on who's saying it. Some seek only modest reductions in money, others actually more funding, while others call, like as Jumi has been saying, for full defunding the abolitionists, right, as a step toward the abolition of police. So an abolitionist framed it this way for me. He said there are reformist reforms and non-reformist reforms, or abolitionist reforms, okay? So reformist reforms, he said, they propose solutions that either don't work, likely become obstacles later, and don't shift the power dynamic. So we could think about body cameras and de-escalation training. And then there's abolitionist reforms, like the movement for Black Lives, which aims to move money and people away from so-called harmful systems towards systems of care, like education and housing. And theoretically, right, this would increase our power to abolish and transform those systems. But let's be clear, both roads are reformist, and they rely on the current state apparatus to make these desired changes. So all across the country, we see the Democratic Party using this defund moment to transform the police departments into forces of community policing. A couple weeks ago, City Council member Marquise Harris Dawson of LA, just like Mayor Lori Lightfoot of Chicago, raised proposals on moving toward a model of community policing, which is straight out of the Obama playbook on Obama's Task Force for Policing in the 21st Century, which was commissioned following the murder of Mike Brown and non-indictment of Darren Wilson. Yet there are studies critiquing Obama's task force recommendations that show that not only is community policing ineffective, it doesn't reduce police violence and actually increases police surveillance on the community. There are also reforms calling for this increase in training and education. Bernie Sanders actually called for increase in funding and adamantly opposes defunding of the police, even though the research again says no evidence suggests that implicit bias training or crisis intervention training reduces police violence. On May 25th, the day George Floyd was killed, at least 5 other people were killed across the US. They were Black, white, Latino, and Pacific Islander. One of the 5 was Joe Luis Castellanos, 38, in Houston, who was a decorated Marine veteran and served 2 combat tours, one in Afghanistan and Iraq, which left him with PTSD. So leading up to Memorial Day, he was in a crisis and told his wife that he would commit suicide. She called the Houston PD as she drove around with her 2 daughters in the car, and just as they spotted him, the Houston PD approached him with guns raised, and as he backed away, they killed him right in front of his family. Now, the Houston Police Department boasts one of the nation's most progressive police chiefs and has a crisis response team that's regarded as one of the country's best. Yet from April 21st through Memorial Day, Houston police had killed 6 people. So look, we should have no illusions that these reforms being pushed will improve the treatment of our class by the police. They have a different function. Another example is the defunding of the police department that's being sort of pushed all around at Camden, New Jersey, which is receiving a lot of attention. So House of Representatives Minnesota, after the murder of George Floyd, says she wants to change to this model of community policing. However, we should understand that Camden's changes towards community policing was motivated by massive economic crisis. Camden was once a boom town, but due to deindustrialization, led to mass unemployment. It went from having the nation's highest poverty rate, with 2 out of every 5 workers living in poverty. Their entire police department was rife with widespread stealing and selling of drugs and guns and planting evidence, falsifying reports. So their decision to defund was a top-down call and not motivated by mass uprisings like we see today. Similarly, in Vallejo, California, their defunding of the police was also due to economic crisis, and it's actually resulted in more workers of color being killed by the police than prior. So of course, as a country, we're living through one of the most worst economic crises of our times due to this pandemic and massive unemployment. Here in LA, the unemployment is worse than it was during the Great Depression. So what community policing has proven, from Camden to Vallejo to Houston, and what will likely come to all our major cities, particularly Black and brown communities, is one that is a slight shift away from mass incarceration to one of mass surveillance. Instead of relying on jails and prisons to address the social problems of capitalism, they're going to use police to control us outside of prisons, in effect, turning our neighborhoods into prisons. As a recent article on Camden stated, community policing is just the public face of broken windows. the ubiquitous surveillance and aggressive policing as more practical reforms to blunt and overtake the more radical demands emerging from the tear gas choked streets. Now, Bernie, Dawson, and Lightfoot, again drawing from the Obama's task force recommendations, literally out of concern for officer well-being due to their overloaded work responsibilities, also calls for shifting current police responsibilities like the social service worker toward non-law enforcement agencies, which could mean a shifting of some money away from the police. So if there was any overlap between what the mainstream Democrats are pushing as it relates to racist community policing and mass surveillance with abolitionist reform demands, it's this: the shifting of responsibilities away from the police to non-law enforcement agencies, although of course for different reasons. And it will likely be this overlap that the Democrats will use to be a selling point in their attempt to win over the allegiance of the working class. For example, the abolitionist reform movement's aim is for local communities to be responsible for public safety, not police, and yet call for redistributing government money from police to housing, education, and jobs, etc. Some groups, as Jimmy even said, expose capitalism and US imperialism to some degree. Black Lives Matter, the Movement for Black Lives, Critical Resistance, and the Marshall Project are a few groups with this aim. The group that I'm a part of is also an extension of the Movement for Black Lives in LA. We mentioned Angela Davis and Ruth Wilson Gilmore. And abolitionists, again, they modeled their movement after the end of slavery. And as Ruth Gilmore says, want a society that centers freedom and justice instead of profit and punishment. They work within the capitalist framework to fight for incremental changes with the aim of complete abolition of the police and prisons. As Ruth Wilson Gilmore stated, quote, "Far from being starry-eyed idealists, we are specialists in the daily grind of deliberate, patient, and persistent work." But what was the abolitionist movement to end slavery without the history of armed violence and slave rebellions, and ultimately the Civil War? And even with that, were the underpinnings of capitalism rooted out? So again, we have to ask ourselves, how does this current abolitionist reform movement challenge the ruling class and their state when they rely on the state apparatus to make their desired changes? Right here in LA, for example, over 70% of LA County's budget goes towards police and incarceration. LA County is the largest jailer in the country, which is the largest cager of workers on the planet, right? Which we know are mainly filled with Black and brown workers. The politicians that run the county have long vocalized wanting to close Men's Central Jail, which is just one of 7 because it's decrepit, not because they want to decarcerate. And just 2 years ago, they were talking about investing $3.5 billion to close the jail and build a new mental health jail. Due to the efforts of this abolition reform struggle, this proposal has been stopped for now. But the current call by the abolitionist movement today, is to close only Men's Central Jail, which we already know the politicians already said they wanted to do. Right. Patrisse Cullors, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, the Movement for Black Lives, etc., has already said one key aspect of defunding the police is shifting, again, these responsibilities away from the police to other agencies. This seems to be the abolitionist reform call that both mainstream Democrats and the activists will agree on. Some money away for social services and other things, but still with community policing and mass racist surveillance. And should we expect other results from a movement that operates on the premise that the state apparatus is neutral and is relying on these very same politicians that are servants of the LA ruling class to abolish the sheriffs and jails? How is that not starry-eyed idealism? These abolitionist reforms are reforms and only serve to save US capitalism. One indication of this is how these movements are funded. The Marshall Project, Critical Resistance, Movement for Black Lives, Black Lives Matter get money from foundations like the Open Society Institute, Arnold Ventures Foundation, the Democracy Alliance, which are composed of venture capitalists and hedge fund billionaires, including individuals like George Soros, who along with the State Department and CIA, funded the imperialist color revolutions in Europe and the Arab Spring throughout the Middle East. Nevertheless, Clearly, these are powerful and inspiring movements that have mobilized hundreds of thousands across the country. We must be involved in these movements, but we should also have the understanding that these reforms can never lead to the kind of society that can eradicate racism and these killer cops. For that, we need to fight for communism. And I'll now introduce Maria, member of Progressive Labor Party, to talk more on this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So we are a revolutionary communist party. We don't believe these very needed, very important, life-saving, life-altering changes in society that people are talking about on the streets, they're talking about in groups that they're in, all that. We don't believe that these changes will happen under capitalism, naturally or otherwise. A violent communist revolution against the system of capitalism, led by the Progressive Labor Party, is what must happen. Now, what does this mean? This means that we have to destroy this elitist-centered capitalist society worldwide, not just in this place where we are, not just in this one country where we are, but worldwide. It has to be destroyed. And it has to be defended. As the comrade stated before, these reforms, they haven't worked yet. They're not going to solve these issues for workers. This revolution will need to be defended. It'll need to be enforced by the working class, a working class devoted to the line of the party, not charismatic leadership. The principles of Marxist-Leninist communism, influenced by Mao, influenced by Du Bois, influenced by Claudia Jones, so on and so forth, and being reflective as well as critical about what we agree with, how we work, how we want to build, and what we want to improve. In this period, as in every period, our party sees that Black workers worldwide are key to proletariat revolution. The ruling class also understands this. Absolutely. They also understand the importance of Black workers, which translates into the need for continually brutalizing the international Black working class through terror, through murder, through making an example out of any Black workers that they need to any place. Our party believes that racism is one of the primary tools that the ruling class uses, has used, will continue to use to oppress all workers, oppressing Black, Latin, Asian, Middle Eastern, Native workers directly, all workers, as well as many working class white brothers and sisters, but historically winning them by bribing them with promises of participating in racism will equal a higher quality of life for them. That too has been a promise largely unrealized. The promise of power, or as much power as an oppressed worker could possibly get under this system. And it's not much power comparatively, but it's the promise of not being the worst. But if you're not the worst, you're still being oppressed. Your life is still shortened. You're still not reaching the promise of just basically being free. You're still dying, you're still starving, and we see that these conditions exist both historically and presently right now. When we look at things like prison populations, we could see that workers are still not faring better. In a Pew Research study in 2017, we could see the Black workers in prison topped at approximately 476,000. Latin workers in prison in the United States topped at about 437,000. White workers in prisons in the United States topped at about 337,000. That's not an advantage. In the past 10 years, these numbers have gotten closer to each other, but the brutalization of the working class has remained constant. The key to the ruling class's brutal control of Black workers here in the US and worldwide continues. We also believe that when the Black working class moves and fights back, the world moves. We see that where we are right now, where Black workers have stood up, where Black workers have gotten in the streets, where Black workers have called out the ruling class, the cops, the education institutions, all of this. other workers have joined because they are being devastated by it too. The leadership of Black workers, in addition to the participation of Black workers, is necessary. It's mandatory for the entire working class to advance and win. There's no way of getting around that. The absolute necessity of the need for Black workers to lead this fight. And this leadership has a rich history, right? From the rebellions in Harlem in 1964, to Progressive Labor Party running the Nazis out of Chicago's Marquette Park in 1979, to our party being right front and center in leadership roles in places like Ferguson, in New York, in Chicago, in LA, in DC, in New Orleans, and now we see this in Minneapolis. We see it. As a fighting party, we've been and we continue to be in these struggles. Progressive Labor Party is right there because it's in these fights that we learn. It's in these fights that we're steeled to do more. It's in these fights that we build with our class. We're being emboldened in our line, in our ability to experience these things and to lead by our relationship with other working class people. So what does this look like? We support fellow workers that fall under attack. We're falling under attack. And we have to be in these struggles no matter what, no matter where they are. We have to be in these mass organizations with our working class siblings. Our lives are on the line. We fight with workers to make as many people's lives better now. We're getting experience in these fights. We're building relationships and we're building the party. That's what's mandatory. Our road to revolution is rooted in building real relationships with people and being in positions to point out inconsistencies in the boss's line, inconsistencies in capitalism, which won't stop. It's mandatory that we not be afraid to push our line, that we're learning to use the boss's weapons against them, that we're being in the mass movements against racism, against sexism, against classism, against ableism, against all capitalist oppression. We have to build a mass party. We cannot shy away from talking about who we are as a communist party and why that continues to be a threat to the ruling class throughout all of these decades. Communism is still a threat. We have to talk about how we can win. And again, it can't be said enough. We have to continue to be in these fights. Right now, in this present period, it's the job of comrades in Progressive Labor Party to be reflective, to be self-critical about our actions toward the goal of having a stronger line, a consistent line, a stronger practice, and to strengthen relationships with other working class people. The reality, as my comrade said, violent revolution, the reality of violent revolution, the necessity of violent revolution is what's missing from the popularized conversation about abolition, is what's missing from the popular conversation about defunding the police. It's either a drastic underestimation of capitalism or it's a reflective of purposeful misleadership, purposeful liberal misleadership, making people believe otherwise, that this transition can just happen naturally outside of revolutionary war. And we continue to see the links that capitalists will go to retain their power and control. And it includes moving closer, and what that includes, right, is moving the world closer to world war. And that's a tradition that imperialists have in terms of resolving power worldwide. The primary and most deadly way this control is maintained internationally is through the military and eventual unavoidable wars. The boss's control, and their control includes giving the appearance of conceding to things that people push, that they need, that they want, reforms. But they continue to make concessions where they want, on their line, under their control. And we've seen that currently. We see this concession of celebrating Juneteenth as a bank holiday, right? But leaving out the revolutionary fight that it took right? For blacks to earn, to fight for their freedom, and how even that was a part of the capitalist plan for furthering control. And it just includes being just still unbelievably brutal, being unbelievably brutal to our class, posing worker fight back, not as something that was a natural course of capitalism, but as looting, as stealing, as something that was the workers' fault. Capitalist reforms are always dishonest. They're always double-edged swords. And they always, no matter which way you go with the double-edged sword, the working class is going to end up getting cut and stabbed either way, unless we take seriously the need for violent revolution. And we believe that true abolition can't be a reality outside of a violent worker class revolution. This has to be led by a revolutionary communist party. There's no in-between steps in this fight. History has proven that this can't succeed. It has to be led by a cadre of fighters. We believe a cadre of fighters in the Progressive Labor Party, populated with workers from all over the world. And we invite everybody watching, everybody listening, to learn more about our fight, to learn more from our members, to join study groups, to read our paper, Challenge Desafío, our online presence on social media, to see that, all of that. We have a world to win, and we want everybody to join us. Thank you.
Woo!
You good? So we'll take any questions, any comments that anybody has.
Great job, comrades. Just want to say that.
Awesome.
Proud to be a part of this with y'all.
Definitely.
Same here. I loved hearing everything that you all said. Like, oh, so proud.
Toe.
I know we have questions.
Okay, who's managing that? Who's managing
Let's
the
see.
questions?
Let's check it out. So here's one question. Is supporting reform temporarily doing our struggle for abolition as an interim step harmful to the overall process? That's a good question.
Yeah.
What do y'all think?
I mean, absolutely not. It's not harmful. You know what I mean? I think it's essential that we involve ourselves in that. You know, these are places where working class people are angry, they're in motion, they're searching for answers. They want change. They want to see a world probably like the one we're fighting for. And so we have to be in those places to be involved in them side by side in the fight, but also through political education, through exposing folks to challenge and our ideas. That's how we're going to grow. If we're not there, we're not going to grow. So we have to be in those places.
Okay. Let's see. We have.
I agree.
Did you have any more to add to that, comrade?
It's necessary for us to be making these fights and doing the work, because like it's necessary for communists to, as you said, like teach people, but also like we need to be in these movements, we need to be moving this forward because these reforms are necessary, because people should be having better lives as we're working towards the revolution.
Mm-hmm. And somebody said too, making these reforms schools for communism. I think that's the difference. I think the difference is as your comrade said, on one hand, a belief that the reform is all that's needed is what we see in a lot of these instances. But it's different the mindset you come to it with. Making it a school for communism, as somebody said. Understanding that we're in these reforms to learn, to grow, to build with other workers, and to smash this system. That's a huge difference, other than just being in it because the reform will be good. I mean, if the reform is good, we want to give every advantage to working class people as much as possible.
with the foreknowledge and the forethought and the intention that this isn't going to be good enough. We're going to have to smash this system. So for sure. Let's see. What else we can talk about? So someone said, can one of the speakers talk about how we will deal with antisocial behavior under communism? Antisocial behavior, I think, is something that we learn under capitalism. It's one of the ways that we deal with the pain that we're under. I guess when I think of antisocial behavior, I think of withdrawing from people, from our fellow workers, withdrawing from the struggle. What is it called? Not personal time. We actually renamed it to be more communal, right? When you take personal time to segregate yourselves from people, you're not fighting. You're not even thinking about the fight. But when you immerse even if the collective decision is for you to take a minute, it's a collective decision. It means something.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's kind of hard to answer in the abstract, but I mean, I think, even now, right, how will we handle it now, right? We struggle against antisocial behavior here as well, right? We are being pulled by individualism and other aspects of capitalist ideas. And so collectively, we handle the situation, we have confidence in our comrades. And so when they, critique us, and not just comrades, but even people outside the party, but who are in our base, right, who can recognize behavior that's considered inappropriate and be open to that kind of struggle, right? And I think that being open to that is the real question, and following that collective leadership and having confidence that in a communist world, not only would it obviously be minimized just by the nature of it, but that should it arise in individuals, that the collective can handle it, that the collective can address it and resolve that issue, whatever that sort of antisocial behavior is.
Mm-hmm. And that is something that I carry with me, because like identifying as this person who follows Black radical tradition and an abolitionist and a communist, like all of these things tie into one another. And just like envisioning this world requires creativity, requires imagination that capitalism stifles from us. And so we can only speak in the abstract but we can know that we'll be better than before.
Okay. So here's another question. The primary election in New York City last Tuesday indicates a lot of support is growing for AOC and other progressive politicians. How can we win their support to the anti-capitalist movement and to communism? I'm not sure whose support, but I'm assuming you mean people who voted for these folks, people who support these folks.
Right.
Maybe we should take it from there.
Yeah.
What do y'all think?
Who wants to go first? I don't mind. Jumi, you got it?
I feel like that just ties into like what we were saying before about like being at the forefront of these reformist movements, just like educating people as we continue our work to be like, hey, you don't have to be limited to this. Come over to communism, like shift a little this way, shift over less.
This way, a little to the left, a little to the left. Yeah, I agree, and I think that we have history on our side too, right? So when they talk about the Green New Deal, we can talk about the New Deal, right? And we can talk about FDR and like his role in leading this country into World War II and the racism behind the New Deal and things like that. And the benefit that we have is that these folks have to show their true colors, right? They're going to expose themselves as saviors of capitalism, right? And not only that, U.S. imperialism, right? They're going to be, assuming they get elected, they're going to be the folks who are going to be trying to mobilize our class for World War, right? So they can't avoid that. They can't avoid that. So us talking about this now, they may disagree with it. No, I don't agree. Okay, sure. And I mean, I could countless examples of folks I've talked to about Obama before Obama exposed himself, right? And so we're like, oh, yeah, that's right. So yeah, I mean, look, we just got to be there, try to be as patient as possible, be fighters like people are saying. but be bold and call their asses out. You know, I mean, they're gonna show their true colors. They have to.
Okay. Here's another question. Addressing the question of who do we call? It's kind of a practical question, right? Who do we call when the police would normally handle a violent situation? And I kind of would like to jump in with that. So I'm from a community where the police didn't always come. I lived in a community for a while where calling the police didn't mean anything. Calling an ambulance didn't mean much. They may come, they may not. And so very practically, and that happens now, quite a few places. And very practically what ends up happening is it's handled intra-communally, right? In some places, you know, the dual role of gangs handle some peacekeeping issues or emergency issues within communities, right? But you know, they still have that negative communal aspect. We see with things like Hurricane Katrina and other natural disasters, the people who are in gangs provided that sense of security for folks.
Right.
They didn't allow, you know, issues of people horribly abusing other folks. So, you know, some of this we can look at how workers are forced to operate right now, and that's looking to each other. You know, some people can't call the cops for whatever reason, so they call a cousin. You know, they call family members, they call friends that aren't necessarily tied right to gangs or whatever else, or maybe they are. Does somebody else have something else to go with that? I mean, and the difference being, you know, we know that the other thing that gangs do is unfortunately, right? They also prey on fellow working class people. So if we're talking about in terms of what we as a party would do, that could not happen, right? We would not allow, in addition to handling these issues internally, the side part of that, which is still having a negative impact on our working class communities.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think, you know, the degree that we're able to respond is really going to be the degree that we have any kind of relationship with our neighbors. I mean, I think about my neighborhood and thinking about my neighbors on the left and right, people that I know, and think, okay, if something were to happen, I at least have these folks that we could go and try to respond to this. Right. I mean, the alternative is you call the police and you've just, I mean, whatever that offense is, it's not, you know, it shouldn't be the right to death. You know, I mean, these cops don't need they don't need a violent situation to respond to and kill you. You know what I mean? Like they kill folks just for being black, for having a wallet, for sleeping in the car, like you name it, right? We know all these things. So the police aren't resolving any situation. So I think if anything, if that's a concern that we have in our neighborhood, it just means then we have to be doing a better job at getting to know our neighbors and community and start building those kinds of relationships to be able to respond. Otherwise, it's just one person anyway. I mean, it's just that capitalism puts us in these terrible scenarios, right? So that's how I'd respond to that.
I completely agree with the both of you. I just agree.
No, you're good. Let's see. Can communism succeed Russia, China, Cuba, etc.? Can communism succeed? Period. Russia, China, Cuba, etc. have not worked out well. Why do you think you can be different? Speaking as you as in the party. I'm gonna take a crack at it. So I can start off by saying those it's just the factual thing, right? They believed in a path to communism where they were socialist. Quite literally. That's what didn't work out. And us as a party, we rely on historical materialism. We rely on learning from history and seeing why that didn't work. Which is why we're a party who fights for communism, directly for communism, not an intermediate step. Anything else? Anybody else?
I mean, I'll just say, I mean, I'm looking off to the side of the comments. I just wanted to echo a comrade mentioned that, you know, the first example of workers' power was the Paris Commune. and of 1871, and they abolished the police, and as use the community to handle these kinds of problems, and it worked. So I just saw that off to the right. So I just wanted to say that. So we have a number of examples. Yeah, I mean, look, we have, on the one hand, we're small, but on the other hand, we have the failures and advances of the past communist movement to learn from, and I feel like, our party has a pretty good or a decent enough understanding of what worked and what didn't work. And a big aspect of that, like you said, was the maintaining of money and certain amounts of privileges that were tied to the socialist system that returned to capitalism in every instance. And so, we have the history of class struggle on our side. We have the history of workers fighting for a better world, and that's going to continue to happen. So the question is, what kind of world are we going to build? And a moneyless classless society of communism is the best way to go. We're going to make mistakes, sure, and hopefully we won't make fatal ones like socialism and nationalism like these others. But what's the alternative, right? The alternative is just living in this horrible system or fighting for a better world. And so I think that's our only option.
Right.
So
And
also,
oh, go ahead.
So also, like, a part of the like, someone said in the comments that Cuba has a blockade that can't be ignored. Like, so much of the failures in which we attribute to these communist countries are primarily because these are not worldwide, because this isn't a worldwide movement, because they exist in pockets when the rest of the world is a capitalist one. So of course capitalists are going to make sure that the international working class and symbols of the international working class winning are they look at them as badly. Like, we instill this anti-communist propaganda from birth. So, like, all of that, can't be ignored. It has to be a worldwide fight.
And somebody mentioned as well the back.
Oh, you're muted, Maria.
With collectivity and struggle.
Can you repeat that? We lost you. It was muted or somehow. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Someone put in the comments, the back page of the most recent Challenge newspaper gives examples of communists in China addressing interpersonal problems with collectivity and struggle. Check it out. Another question: Black workers are leading the fight, but how are they won to communism? Felipe, you don't want to take it? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, nationalism. Still. I'm just playing. Go ahead, girl.
Like,
go for it.
Continuing that same conversation, obviously, like, being in these movements and these reform efforts that, like, again, like, we have to be there. Like, we have to consistently show up at these orgs so that when, like, these moments of mass unrest and mass uprisings happen, like, you can look to these orgs already, to us as an org already, and be like, okay, these people are consistently here. These people consistently align with the work that we're doing. Like, let's take the next step. Like, that's where we go.
I mean, I think the way so many working class people in general, but particularly because oppression, lack of resources, brutality, all of that is concentrated within the Black working class. We already know. We already believe. We, not to speak for everybody, but in our experiences, we're our lived experiences is seen as not being able to trust neither cop nor military nor capitalist system. Right, and in terms of Black people's lived experiences, we know that we have to look within, but not just within our race. So what continual learning and base building taught me is that there is a class that experiences these things as well. As Black people, we are not experiencing this brutality alone. There is a type of brutality, a level of brutality that may be unique, but the brutality experienced is not just experienced by us. And we fight by building relationships, alliances with people who are also experiencing this brutality, other working class people. And that's our experience. We live that. We know that. The issue for us as party members is to bring what we see, what we call that answer to people, because they're already familiar with the issue. The issue is life. That's the issue under capitalism.
I
So
mean,
those
look,
of us who have encountered the line and joined the party, we have to. It's our responsibility to not keep that word within us. You know, to not keep the party just to us. We have to spread it.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Hey, look, I grew up in the party lucky enough to do that, and so grew up with Black communists, and so grew up with multiracial folks fighting racism, and have, I didn't know our comrade over here, Jumi, actually before this, but I've just heard her story, and that's proof in the pudding. And actually, I've known you, and have seen your evolution to this leader, and so we know our history too. Please, I mean, in Chicago, comrade used to be a slang term that Black folks in Chicago used to use because of the role of the Communist Party in Chicago, in the 30s and whatnot. So that's, history has already proven that point, and you all are proving it in the present. And our party, is really, leading the world as it relates to multiracial unity, but also understanding the role of Black leadership, Black working class leadership, also, right, as opposed to the varying identity politics of these other orgs out there. So. And so-called, left groups out there that have the same kind of bad ideas. So yeah, I think we're living proof of that.
For sure. Let's see. Okay, fine. What are some of the biggest barriers for people being more involved in the fight or in the party? In parentheses, we know introducing communist ideas to people alone doesn't necessarily result in them believing in communism. Ain't it? So what are some of the biggest barriers? The lies that the ruling class has given us throughout our whole lives about the possibility for the working class to fight back, about the possibility for the working class to win, and about the reality of particularly communism. The truth about it is one of them.
And also the way, again, that capitalism stifles us and stifles our imagination. With all of this propaganda, we can't imagine that we could fight back because we're too tired to, because it hasn't worked already. And also it's like, okay, so with a barrier, when I talk to people about communism, one thing that some people say is that I do all of this, like, I agree with communists, but I haven't done the reading yet, so I don't identify as a communist. And I think the thing with that is you can still call yourself a communist. Just don't like say wrong things, but like keep those ideas in your head, and then like if you think that this is the path that you need to follow, then say that that's what you need to do, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, it's a lot of things.
Please do study.
Yeah. What was that last part? I missed it. What was that last part?
Please study, though. You should be reading Marx. You should be reading like all of these people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. We're asking folks to. We need a violent worldwide revolution, and I think that that's a really big ask of someone who doesn't particularly have a who's for their own individualism, whatever's going on in their life, had these other sort of goals, and we're saying no, we should be doing this in our life. I think it's it's a big leap for some people, and I think that although given the sort of trajectory that U.S. capitalism is in, and this decline and this slippery slope to world war, I think people's priorities are going to change. But still, right now, the sort of level of individualism, kind of thinking about number one or the family or work or whatever, it's sort of like it's not necessarily seen all the time as sort of something that people want to prioritize on their list, even though theoretically they may agree with a lot of the ideas. I mean, I've seen that with definitely friends of mine who've come to different parties, party events and May Day, etc. Yeah. Again, I mean, I've seen just comments along the side about building that class consciousness. The long-term relationships and these struggles, right? I mean, I think all of those things are critical here because I mean, people change, ideas change all the time, and so we just have to kind of be persistent and maintain these relationships as much as possible. And as conditions change, as long as we're operating within these conditions, then that then our ability for growth and possibly rapid growth will happen.
Okay, so we have another question. Friends are asking about general strike, when and how. I told them it's not effective if just one of them walks out of their job, and maybe they should work to support or organize strikes at other places. That would be more effective, like transportation, etc. So I guess what is this? What are some ways that a general strike? What are more ways maybe that a general strike can be successful? And if that's not the spirit of the question, please feel free to elaborate in the comments. But I guess this is kind of going towards why we need a party, right? This is going towards what a party can bring to the planned fight back, right, against these institutions, as opposed to not just one individual, but even several individuals not having a particular plan, not having a particular line to go with their rebellion, to go with them seeing a need for rebellion. That's where a party comes in. That's where a line comes in. That's where large scale collectivity comes in. That's where being able to rely on people who are right there with you in the fight comes in, and you know what you're fighting for, and you have an agreement about that. It's just one of the things that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think these sort of like absolute conversations about things aren't necessarily the most helpful. I mean, obviously we before a general strike. I mean, obviously, I think but again, it's sort of like we can't make things sort of materialize out of thin air. So I think it's sort of working in the areas where either some strikes might be happening, thinking about the various fight back that's happened around this pandemic. You hear things about nursing staff, fighting for the proper equipment, or various the so-called essential workers, fighting for better wages or better safety conditions. That's where motion is happening. And so it would be thinking about connecting your workplace to those struggles and saying, hey, every time the police kill somebody, we're going to go out, we're going to walk out, or something like those kinds of connections are going to be essential. Not that we can just say, hey, have a general strike, right? So I just think it's sort of, it's involving ourselves and immersing ourselves in places where people are in motion, connecting our work to those things, our places of work, maybe ensuring that we're working in a place that is either essential, or working with Black and brown workers, or et cetera. And so we're able to make our workplace a fighting place, and a way to connect to the various expressions of class struggle that we see, whether it's here, domestic or internationally, right? Connecting it to the international struggles as well. So I think that would be in my mind, a sort of a better way of addressing sort of a general strike in the abstract.
So this is an important question, and I think this is a question we're probably going to wrap up with. addressing increasing fascism internationally as related to the role of the police and the state apparatus in general. We've had a few questions about this international aspect, tying the struggle we're having now to the international struggle, and how we as a party respond to that. Maybe respond both in how we're thinking about it, but also responding both in, a plan for it. So the international struggle, relating what's happening here to what's happening internationally.
So, like, as I spoke on earlier, all of these systems of exploitation are formed from the same basis as these forms of exploitation that came about in the early 19th century, all at the same time: slavery, the Industrial Revolution, prisons, police, all that. Like, and all of these things are spread across the world. And because capitalism has spread so far and so deeply, and so many of these systems of exploitation are entrenched from the same cast, like they come from the same place, it means that our struggle is the same. Like, is the same not only because we're all workers, but also like because we're dealing with the exact same mechanisms and tools of suppression and control. So we have to be sharing all of this information. We have to be amplifying all of the fights that are happening across the world, and we have to actively like connect ourselves to their struggles because they are our struggles. Like, we are one and the same.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, as we talk about the development of fascism around the world, I mean, what we're really talking about is the growing crisis of of imperialism globally, right? So we're seeing this closer potential clash between the U.S. ruling class and China and Russia, and we're seeing all these other sort of like other players like Iran and maybe South Korea and other, sort of like this vying. Europe is possibly splintering away because of who are they going to ally with, whether it be a pro-U.S. or pro-China. So we're seeing this sort of like tension within every capitalist country or definitely imperialist country around the world. And each of these capitalists are sort of fighting each other, right? So we see it in France, we see it here, we see it in Iran, we see it all over the world where one set of bosses are fighting each other, and there's this fight to kind of discipline them. And at the same time, they're mobilizing the working class on either side of this thing. And so we see, sort of how Trump sort of mobilized folks and around, with Coke and some of these other sort of more domestic bosses. And then we see, the more sort of liberal main wing ruling class mobilizing around the Democrats, et cetera. So we see how working class folks are being pitted together, but that aspect is building this kind of class unity, which is one aspect that is one aspect of fascism. Building all class unity, disciplining of the ruling class is another aspect of fascism, but it's all in this movement towards world war. And so I think as we sort of develop our analysis of fascism internationally, it can't just be, like what the liberals are saying, what some of our friends are saying, Trump's a fascist. Well, yeah, okay. But really, he's nothing compared to what the ExxonMobil types or these other types want to do around the planet, right? And so again, I think that it's just, recognition that there are these, we say this in our paper all the time. So people, please should be reading Challenge Desafio, a communist newspaper with sort of our kind of global analysis and sort of where the, how the ruling class is going to be trying to manipulate some of these struggles, like the Black Lives Matter movement and others, to build some degree of patriotism, some degree of kind of all class unity to the degree that they can, while at the same time crushing the Black and brown communities with community policing and all these other increased surveillance, right? They're going to be doing both of these things as they move closer to world war. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be a fighting party in spite of knowing this understanding. We have to be out in the open, but we have to also be underground. We should probably be talking more about that and doing more of those things to build the kind of mass party that we're going to need to overthrow these guys, to overthrow the capitalist system.
Absolutely. Carmad, did you have some brief closing words? June, yes.
Capitalism is by its nature unstable, and police and prisons do not have to continue existing for capitalism to, police and prisons don't have to continue existing the way they are for capitalism to still oppress and to still use tools to oppress and suppress us. We have to recognize that capitalism is flexible, and the oppression and domination of our class can only no longer occur. The only way the domination and oppression of our class can no longer occur is if there is a communist revolution, and then we can abolish prisons and police.
Dope. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Please get in contact with whoever you know in the party. Please interact with us on our social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @PLP Challenge. Please read the paper. You can access the paper online at plp.org. There we go. plp.org. If you're interested in getting the paper, if you get a hold of the paper, there's information about you getting delivered the paper regularly. Make sure that you're interacting with party members. Make sure that you're going to party events. Keep talking about this stuff. It's so necessary. Power to the working class, y'all. Power to the working class. Thank you.